Hi, everyone. Welcome to Evelyn Ackah's podcast. I'm a cross-border immigration lawyer, and I'm so excited to have Wilder Clements joining me on the Ask Canada Immigration podcast. Welcome, Wilder.
Thank you for having me, Evelyn. Good to be here.
I'm really excited you're here. Wilder is the owner and managing lawyer of Clements Employment Law based in California. And I'm going to give you a brief bio. Wilder brings experienced and value-driven counsel to purpose-driven businesses and organizations with challenging employment law questions and issues. Wilder is experienced in advising clients on the complexities of federal and state labor and employment law. They understand steps business and organizations needed to take to treat and pay their workers fairly, and serves as an instrumental partner in helping organizations and businesses align their purpose with the people first practices. So I'm very interested, Wilder, to learn all about people first. So welcome, and I'd love to hear about how you became an employment lawyer. Let's start there with your process and your development into being a lawyer.
Sure. I became an employment lawyer because I was very interested, had an interest in uh, labor and employment and workplaces. And that first started doing policy work in Washington, D.C. before I went to law school, working on some civil rights legislation on a national basis. And then when I came to UC Berkeley, focused in on labor and employment law and had the opportunity to, after law school, work on developing a model national program for paid family leave, paid parental leave, which we still
Wow.
don't have here in the United States. But we do have that in California and a few other states. So studying what California had done. And then
Mhm.
I went and became a real lawyer and litigated and worked in a Am Law 200 firm
Yep.
and became a labor and employment counsel, mostly to employers. And then I decided to go out on my own. I've always had an entrepreneurial spirit. I'm a fourth generation lawyer in my
Oh my
family,
God.
all of whom have owned their own firms.
So how long have you had Clements employment law? When did you start?
I've been doing this for 5 years.
Wow, that's exciting. So you and I have a similar trajectory. We did the big law thing and said enough of that. I could do this differently, better, and make it feel better as well for ourselves. So I think that's really important. So I want to get into the questions, Wilder, because California is so different. And when I think about immigration and our clients that move to the US, that go to California, or the HR people that we work with that are on both sides of the border, they're always asking kind of Canadianize something or Americanize a document or Californiaize a document. So tell me about this culture first in California's evolving workplace. How does that work? Explain your unique culture first approach, because I don't really understand what that means, except knowing that it's about the importance of a business's culture. How does that approach impact your practice?
Sure. I have seen over my 13, almost 14 years of defending employers in high stakes lawsuits, counseling employers, dealing with all kinds of disputes that at the end of the day, at least half of those disputes involve some kind of cultural breakdown in the workplace,
Hmm.
whether it's a communication breakdown, people moving too fast in terms of managers and not taking the time to really mentor and do those check-ins, or whether it's something bigger like not paying attention to demographic changes in the workplace that older folks in the workplace need to be trained on, or even younger people not taking the time to teach older workers how new technology comes in.
Mhm.
And that leads to, workplaces really are in many ways, they are not families, but they are their own cultural institutions.
Yes,
And
they
so,
are.
yes. So I say, no matter how small or big the company, culture is a liability for organizations that don't tend to it.
Mhm.
And so what I mean by culture first, it's a commitment, right? It's a values approach. Like we cannot be successful without our workers.
That's
Our
right.
workplace needs to evolve for, technology to be competitive, all of that. But we're committed from the top down to developing a positive, inclusive culture.
Mm.
And again, I think that because I've seen so many disputes really just arise out of miscommunication, lack of trust.
Yeah,
And my role, I really wanted to be able to prevent those disputes from even getting filed in court.
yeah.
And so I focus a lot on preventative work. And in California, there's no shortage of doing that because we are our own little mini country here, the fifth largest economy in the world. We have our own labor and employment scheme that is quite different from many other states and federal law.
Okay. Oh my God, that's so interesting. So when you say culture first, in terms of working with do you mostly work with employers or employees, Wilder?
I mostly work with employers.
Okay.
I find that work is rewarding because I really get to help develop that
Yeah.
culture,
Yeah.
especially for newer businesses. I started my own firm because I was advising a startup in San Francisco that was a woman of color, got the most funding she had ever gotten and anybody had gotten from VCs in
Yeah.
Silicon Valley. And honestly, she encouraged me. She's like, I don't want to give my money to these big firms. Why don't I just work with
Do it
you? And
yourself. Oh, I love that. I think I even know who that is. That's exciting. So when we all talk about California law, I've talked to lots of other lawyers across the US, but you're the first employment lawyer I've spoken with on this podcast. What makes California so different? What are some of the practical differences, or what are the weird situations that you encounter in California, or obligations that employers have that they don't have anywhere else?
sure. I think I'll start with something that HR professionals, admin people, kind of the bane of their existence, the technicalities of how to pay people in California, particularly hourly workers, is very complex. And also, California is very strict with respect to what we call misclassification of employees. So, you can't just start your startup, and employ a bunch of independent contractors in California. That will run you into some issues. Also, things like providing meal and rest breaks is something that's not a federal law, but almost every big company doing business in California has seen multi-million-dollar lawsuits on that issue in the last 10, 15 years, because
Mm.
it's become very easy in California to bring a class action lawsuit against an employer, and that on a state level under
Yeah.
state law. And so when that has become so easy, plus there's a couple of particular laws in California, the Private Attorney General's Act, which
Mhm.
can allow an employee to bring not even a class action lawsuit, but a separate claim, a representative action. And there are just millions of dollars of penalties that can accrue for even technical pay stub violations. Like for example, including the wrong business address on a pay stub. If you've done that for a few hundred employees over 3-4 years, that's going to cost you, money. So
Oh,
there's a lot of technical requirements. I think that's a big risk factor. And
yeah.
then the second risk factor is California is a very diverse state, and
Mm.
it prides itself on its diversity, equal employment opportunity. It's been on the vanguard of civil rights legislation since 1930, and it prides itself on having very robust civil rights protections for a variety of its like very diverse demographics. So the California Department of Civil Rights is very active in enforcement. And so that makes it even more important for California employers to make sure they're developing like that, again, inclusive work culture, not just because it's a good way to do business, but it's also a really good way to stay in
Of
compliance.
course. It sounds like it's so interesting. A very compliance focus. Like some of the things you're telling me, I'm like little mistakes, like again, with little mistake if it's an address. So where did that come from? Like almost feels like for an employer, it's almost a scary culture to be in, or scary, where you just are like, whoa, something is coming up. Like where did that compliance focused and seeking lots of different claims or actions come from in California and originate from? Do you have a sense of that? Because it feels like it's almost biased now against the employer. There's not a real balance.
Yeah, I think with some of these technical violations that employers can run into, it is too heavy on the uh, penalties for technical violations,
Mhm.
because at the end of the day, who wins in that calculation? It's not workers, it's
No.
attorneys,
Ugh,
right?
yeah,
So it's attorneys because
yeah.
class action, of course, if an attorney wins, they take 40% of that class
Mhm.
action settlement, and a
Mhm.
worker may be getting a couple $100. But
Wow.
so, and not to be too cynical, but I
Yeah.
do think that there have been mechanisms that make it much easier for the plaintiff's bar to take home really large settlements for what honestly is not that most of an impactful thing for workers.
Mhm.
That said, I think the purpose is, I think California wants employers to, what's the point of having the right address on the pay stub? What's the point of making sure,
Yeah,
each
do it right.
they want workers to be able to tell, here's what I was paid, here's
Yeah,
what I was paid for, and whether or not it was right. And
yeah,
I understand
of
that
course.
policy purpose
Yeah.
behind it.
For sure. I mean, we want to always be correct. I guess the issue is mistakes happen. People are human, and it just seems quite punitive
Yeah.
compared to the Canadian culture. So let's just say that I'm like, wow. One thing we've talked about before, just in some of our other chats, has been EPLI insurance. So this culture in California of really focusing on the employee, it seems like, and protecting employees, which I think is a great thing. Is the EPLI insurance so much more critical now because of the level and volume of potential, punitive damages, etc.? Do you find that will it help if somebody's in a situation that you're describing that there's a class action based on the wrong address? Will that actually protect the employer or not really?
The answer is yes and no. I think it's
Okay.
always yes. A California employer, if you've reached even 20 employees in California, I recommend having a serious conversation about carrying employment practices liability insurance.
Okay.
A lot of EPLI policies don't necessarily cover wage and hour class action lawsuits because it's like wildfires in California, where employers have become uninsurable because they have the wildfire of wage and hour litigation. So it really depends from policy to policy.
Yeah.
So you have to be careful to ask the right questions.
Mhm.
Maybe you'll be able to get defense costs covered, but not the ultimate settlement, for
Settlement.
example, in a class action.
Wow.
Generally for wrongful termination cases of discrimination, harassment, that kind of thing, those cases are generally covered by most EPLA policies that I have seen,
Okay.
and are very valuable to have.
Okay, so we recommend every California employer have lots of EPLI insurance.
Yeah.
And I remember that conversation with you, and I was like, I need to check if we have it because it's not as common in Canada, actually. So it's becoming more, but I think if you have more regulations, you need it more, right? And I think that's important. So I've already looked into it. I want to talk about the future of work. Because I know you speak and you present, all over for employers as well as for businesses. Discuss the legal implications of some of these trends, Wilder, on AI, automation, remote work, and the gig economy. It's a big challenge for me as an employer. Even I have half of my team is remote, which is great. And we still have an office because the rest are here. But it becomes a struggle as an employer when you're like somebody wants to go work from home and their job is really not a job that would necessarily be possible to
Mhm.
work from home. So tell me about what are you seeing right now in terms of that?
I can't even count the number of remote work policies, arrangements I have drafted in the last 4 years,
Oh my God.
and continue to as this evolves. Remote work is, I think, in terms of the future of work, depending on the job, I think there is absolutely, like COVID, it was already happening
Yeah,
before the pandemic. And now it is absolutely here, especially for younger generations of workers. There's a real balance, though, that employers need to strike, because they have to be able to also provide effective training opportunities, especially for those younger workers just out of college, just out of law school or professional school. And some of that training needs to happen in person on the
yeah.
job. And so sometimes I'm seeing cases where those, more junior employees are coming into the office, 2, 3 days a week, but their managers are working from home. So their managers aren't there to train them. And so, uh,
That's
so
so
I
great.
think I think really an organization needs to take a step back and really articulate what are their values around both flexibility, wanting to make
Mhm.
sure people have,
Yeah,
reasonable flexibility, as well as the values around creating, a team and collaboration. And how do we do that? And you can be creative in doing that. Maybe
Mhm.
it's not that you're in the office 5 days a week with each other, but maybe it's you're having more quarterly intensive in-person
Yeah,
events. I've seen
yeah.
clients be very creative with this.
Mm.
The point again comes back for me to communication and values, and
Yeah.
don't just wing it. There's legal, of course, compliance
Write
issues
it
with
down.
winging it, but write it down. Make sure your managers are on board. Take some employee surveys to
Yeah,
see what people actually want.
yeah.
Um,
I'm taking notes, girl, because
Good.
as I know, like we've kind of morphed, like many people through COVID, into everybody was in the office to having remote people that could be, and all of that. And it's you it definitely forces the firm to be flexible, but also creative, as you say. We just had our quarterly launch, for our quarter. We always do a quarter meeting all day. So we had everybody on Zoom and then everybody that was in the office. And it was like a long day of values and process and goals and all those things. But I think what you're saying is right, is there has to be some way to actually be together. So for instance, in Canada, I have like a baby lawyer, I call her, right now in my office, but you can't really article. It's kind of like interning or clerking. How do you do that to somebody who just out of law school doesn't know anything and they're sitting at home? So I think it has to work in the way that you just described. It has to be practical. How do you share all the knowledge in my head and try to give that mentoring and training, and it's all remote? Like, I don't know if it's possible all the time.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it's possible all the time. There are some creative solutions, and a junior attorney wants to be able to just pop in and ask a really quick
Exactly.
question without having to schedule a separate Zoom.
Yeah.
Some of my clients have sort of working sessions where
Yeah.
they'll pop on Zoom together and they'll just, turn off their camera, put on mute, they'll work together, and if they have a question, come off of mute.
Oh, I
But
love that.
so that's one thing.
Yeah. That's great. What about monitoring? I mean, this is the question I'm sure you come up with when we think about AI and automation and the gig economy, but also monitoring or not monitoring, how you know your people are working. Those must be issues that are coming up for your client. Like, what do we do to make sure they're actually not doing 5 jobs? How do we know they're producing the same quality work as if I was walking down the hall and I could see them?
Yeah, I think this is where it becomes very important to, just because someone works from home, to not treat that as an informal environment, to treat that home office as an extension of your actual office, meaning that employees need to be provided with company equipment, ideally. And yes, I mean, just like any company is going to be monitoring systems and things like that, monitoring when people are, at least doing some spot checks. This is not about
Mhm.
surveillance, but some
Mhm.
spot checks around, is this person really online,
Yeah.
doing what they're doing? I also, of course, I can't emphasize enough the importance of a good employee handbook that spells this all out, that makes sure, and a confidentiality agreement that makes sure also that your data is protected.
Yeah.
Also seeing now, you mentioned AI, making sure that you have in your confidentiality agreement very clear that your associate's not putting attorney-client privilege information into Chat GPT.
Oh my God.
Um,
Now you're freaking me out. I'm writing it all down. I have to update our manual. Yeah, this ChatGPT thing. So what you're saying is, I mean, I've never used it for that, but I hardly use it. But the idea, we usually just use it to like draft blogs or something. But
Sure.
so to put in like, this is the file and this is the case and this is the really, oh my
Yeah, be very careful about that. Don't
God.
do it.
Don't do it,
And
obviously.
also, we've seen that the output for ChatGPT for lawyers is not you're not gonna, don't do what that attorney did in New York.
New
And
York.
yeah.
We're all watching that. That was the most stupid thing I've ever heard of, is we're lying. And anyway, it's, yeah, there are other ways to do it. I mean, we use a lot of automation in our practice, and I'm wondering if you do, especially when you're smaller, you want to take advantage of technology. So any risks there that you can see from an employer perspective? Like we use Zapier for a whole bunch of things, just to get the information we need from people. We automate text messages and things like that to clients. What are you seeing in that sphere in particular with employers?
Sure. I think in terms of, I used to give trainings that said the E in email stands for evidence. And now I give training that says the S in Slack stands for
Oh, Slack.
right? So, however you're communicating with employees or, of course, customers,
Yep.
clients, that kind of thing. Again, don't treat those systems as informal as they look, because
Yeah.
the reality is we're all entering this data, and the data, either you have an obligation to keep the data, right?
Yeah.
Or you have an obligation to produce the data, and a lot of things just are kept. And so I have seen in terms of also litigation, an absolute increase in e-discovery, that kind of thing. My advice on like text messaging systems, those kind of communication systems, I'm fine with them, but I want them to be owned by the company, and the
Of
company to
course.
be the administrator of them.
Of
I
course.
I don't want to see, personal cell phones really being used very much. There's all kinds of reasons for that,
Course.
but
Yeah. No, I agree with that completely. I mean, we have a Slack policy, of course, in the firm, and confidentiality, but it's always a new world. Is like now I've been seeing other cases where employees are taking pictures of the Slack for purposes of other things. And it makes you start feeling like, oh my God, am I under attack? I mean, how do you deal with employers who start to feel just a loss of faith of goodwill because they're being sued or being questioned or whatever? Like, do you feel like they're losing some of that optimism of being an entrepreneur or business owner sometimes?
oh, definitely. I do get that. And I think for me, I do advise a lot of entrepreneurs who maybe haven't ever had to fire somebody. And once they go through that once, I guarantee them that it's easier the second
Yeah.
time. And then they get their systems, buttoned up.
Yeah.
But this is why it is, important, but it's time consuming, but important to have those, team expectation meetings, those
Yeah.
team meetings, where you're continually communicating what the values and expectations are. And again, you are like ultimately,
Responsible.
sometimes you're gonna have a bad apple. You're gonna
Yeah.
have something happen.
Yeah.
And usually it's more about how you respond. And I
Yeah.
use the word respond carefully. Don't react, respond to a situation.
Yes, I hear you. Call your lawyer right away before you do anything. I know I have my great employment lawyer. It's important. It's just like your banker. You need to have a good employment lawyer on speed dial for anything before you do anything, and make sure that you've set up your systems and policies. Tell me about this employer brand, um, building a strong employer brand. I love that, but what does that mean to you, and the connection between the employee experience and the reputation of your firm, and what businesses can do to really leverage that?
Sure. I think employer brand is more important than ever. And just because you're one Google search away from a very bad review
Mhm.
by an employee. And of course, like a lot of folks are going to understand, okay, this is a, one disgruntled
Frontaled.
employee.
Yeah.
But if there's 20 or
Oof.
30, not so great reviews,
Mhm.
that's why this is important. And
Yeah.
trying to get on those, people are looking for workplaces that give them both professional development and seem to care about them as a human,
Yeah.
which is I think increasingly difficult in a remote environment.
Yeah.
Um, but I do think it's definitely important to, attracting and retaining the best talent.
Yeah.
And I like to say, don't be afraid to ask for feedback
Mhm.
from your staff. Like, you don't know what you don't know. And I'd much
Exactly.
rather, like, hey, I actually think I'm being paid 20% less than what I
Mhm.
should be, or what I'd rather,
Yeah,
or, I'm working 24/7, but my boss has no idea. I'd
Mhm.
rather know that
For
so we
sure.
can address it.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of being open to reasonable feedback
Yeah.
is a really good quality
As
for an
opposed to a
employer.
pylon, like there's a balance, right? So
Yeah.
like we just started using a program that's kind of an HR program because we're at the point where it's like we need more than just
Yeah.
informal or surveys that are not being kept. And so this program is a platform that keeps everything, and we can send these quick little feedbacks and check-ins and all of that because you have the remote and the in-person people. So I'm really hoping that that will also help us to create that sense of we're all together, but also to keep records better, so the reviews you do, whether it's quarterly and semi-annually and annually, they're all in one place. So
Mhm.
how do you recommend that employers, say they're small to medium and they're not, we're small, maybe 16 people or even less, how do you recommend they keep records so that they can help protect themselves?
Mhm. I think investing in a good HRIS system,
Yeah.
human resources information system, is a good idea. Also, yes, have your employment lawyer on dial, but also consider at what size do you might need to bring some in-house people operations or HR experience.
Mm-hmm.
So either bring it in-house or have an HR consultant.
Yeah, that's what we
Um,
have.
yeah, and because I'd like to shield the people on the top from some of the more difficult conversations. And being able to have somebody who's trained, who knows this stuff, who can be on top of
Yeah.
things, is a really good idea for a growing business. So I think an HR consultant is a really important asset to bring in, and
Mm-hmm.
ideally someone who's not just doing the back end things like payroll or things like that,
Yeah.
but can actually offer some like conflict resolution services, being
Mhm.
able to offer some facilitation in the workplace. I
Mhm.
think that that's a really effective tool.
But I think so too. I mean, one thing in the States is you have, I don't even know, tell me, affirmative action laws, which are very different, in Canada. Do you still have it, or was that completely abolished, or I wasn't sure how it works? And then also in employment as an employer, how are you seeing those provisions around whether it's, discrimination and all of that? How are they managing that?
Sure. So generally, affirmative action is illegal in the United States following the Supreme Court's decision this last summer.
Yeah.
And in fact, it kind of always, in terms of private businesses,
Yeah.
who don't receive government funds, it was already illegal to
Okay.
to affirmatively consider race or gender or any other factor in an employment decision.
Okay.
Um, with some limited exceptions.
Mhm.
So that definitely bumps up against companies' efforts on diversity, equity, and inclusion, right?
No.
Right. So again, I think on sort of diversity, equity, and inclusion, there's so many ways that you can address preventing discrimination, cultural competence,
Mhm.
without quotas,
Yeah.
without being like, oh, you check this box. In fact, I think a lot of workers, they don't want
I
that.
don't
They
want that.
actually just want their bosses, to not discriminate, to not
Yeah.
harass, to have
Yeah.
some cultural competence. I think there's so many ways you can address DEI,
Agree.
with training, with recruiting at the right places.
Yeah.
It's definitely not illegal to support community-based organizations that are helping build the pipeline of talent, that kind of thing. So I actually think that, yeah, there is a lot of other holistic ways to support talent that have nothing to do with affirmative action.
That's good. Okay. It's very different in Canada. So listen, as we get close to the end, I want to talk a little bit about, you started your firm like I did. Yours is 5 years old and you're busy, which makes me very happy because the entrepreneurial journey, no matter how much you like it, is also very challenging. And I don't come from a family of lawyers. And so the fact that you've had all these 4 generations and it's like, um, What was the biggest reason you decided to start your own law firm, Wilder?
I wanted to chart my own course as an attorney and be able to choose my clients.
Mm-hmm.
I had this vision for providing a different type of employment counsel service
Yeah.
to businesses, and I felt like the way I could do that was on my own. I have a creative pricing structure that you can't get at a big firm,
Yeah.
and I'm able to do that because I make my own decisions about what I'm spending money on, my expenses, revenue, all of that. And so I'm able to be flexible. But the biggest reason is being able to work with clients who are aligned with me, who I feel excited about. And again, I wanted to focus on this preventative aspect of
Yeah,
things. I will litigate. I can litigate.
of course.
And I find it to be a completely losing proposition for both employers and employees for the most part. No one really wins.
I love that value because you're right. I mean, when you're getting to that part, it's over. You're just lawyers against lawyers, and there's just money. I always say, like, there always has to be a place where you could fix it before it gets to that point, if possible. And so I love that you're focusing on prevention, whereas there's no real motivation for big law firms to
No.
be preventative. They're like, great, let's litigate. And I've met a lot of lawyers who are like, the hourly rate versus the flat fee, which is kind of my model, even is more flat fee, is there's no incentive to be efficient if it's all hourly all the time. So I definitely feel you. I think those are real reasons to just shift your philosophy and look for what's in everyone's best interest, as opposed to the big law firm that's making money off of your grunt work for hours and hours a day. So now that you've had this firm for 5 years, what lessons have you learned as an entrepreneur that you look back and you think, I wish I'd known that, or I'm so glad I did that? Like, what are your thoughts looking back in terms of how it's gone?
Oh, I think one lesson learned is uh, I think I knew this, but people appreciate good work.
Yes.
They also appreciate a lawyer they can actually have a good human conversation with,
Yes.
someone who brings both like that legal expertise and common sense. And I think I do. I have this very common sense. I'm from the Midwest in the United. I'm from
Yeah.
Nebraska,
Yeah.
Middle of Nebraska, country lawyers, like, and I'm like, am I really getting paid to just give common sense advice here?
Yes,
I
you
am.
are.
I am. Okay. I think what I wish I would have known, I think I wish I would have known earlier in my career that this was possible. I mean, I'm so grateful for the training I
Yeah,
got in big law,
me
but
too.
I went to a pretty fancy law school and they certainly didn't teach that this was an option to do.
Mhm.
And I wish I would have gotten more business skills,
Me
right?
too.
Like, here's the
Holy
accountant
cow.
you need, here's how to do your bookkeeping, all of
Bookkeeper.
those
Yeah.
things.
Yeah. No, I think that's true. They don't teach that in law school. And all the law firm owners I know, we are all trying to patch it together now and have our team. You have your accountant, and then you have your bookkeeper, and you make sure you're not doing everything, because we're not experts at everything. And so I think knowing where to bring in other people, the consultants or the people that have that, is going to save you, if you're a new lawyer, and that wants to be an entrepreneur, a lot of time. And good technology is kind of, for my thing as well, is very good technology. So listen, I know that you also speak at the Human Resource Management program, certificate program at Sonoma. What are you teaching them? These are for our future workers and employers. What kind of response do you get when you talk to them about what's ahead as you lecture them?
Sure, sure. I like to say I would have been a professor, but for I'm too practical. And so I'd love to teach.
Yeah.
And so being, adjunct faculty at Sonoma State in their
Great.
HR program, I help people who are already professionals, right? Who
Yeah.
are seeking to get that certification. And again, I really love talking to HR people, ops people. I find that they're some of the most passionate about what
Yeah.
they do, but people really underestimate the responsibilities they have, right?
Yeah.
They have all, especially in California, they
Oh,
have
Oh, the
thousands of
risk.
compliance things to worry about. And
Yeah.
then they've got the culture to attend to. Then
Yeah.
they have management that's saying, why is my labor cost so
So
expensive?
high. Yeah.
So they have a lot to balance. And so I teach about 200 students
Wow,
every year.
that's great.
And I really, I really enjoy it. I teach them the fundamentals of employment law. I'm primarily
Good,
focused on California,
good.
and I help them. My goal for them is I'm going to help you spot issues,
Mhm.
not to solve all the issues, but
No.
so you know who to call.
Yeah, absolutely. You need to know what you don't know. I think that's very valuable. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Wilder. I'm just feeling like, even though I feel tight with my employment law stuff, there's always more to be done. And it kind of raises these little topics where you think, I'll have to call my employment lawyer. But I want to thank you so much. I love what you're doing. I love the work you're doing. And I love the passion that you bring. And this is why I wanted you on the podcast, because we want to show people that lawyers and professionals and those that are around us that we deal with every day, there's a reason we're doing this work. It's not just to make money. It's because it is seriously a driving passion and a value. And whenever I've seen you, you're bringing that forth. And so I want to thank you for the work and thank you for participating in the Ask Canada Immigration Law Firm podcast. And if you ever need to reach Wilder because you're an employer or an employee, but mostly employer in California, how can they reach you besides finding you on the website, Clements Employment Law? Are you on social media as well?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, Wilder Clements. I'm also on Instagram at Clements Employment Law. Or shoot me an email at support@clementsemploymentlaw.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I hope you get lots of traction from this, but also that you get to choose the fun people you like to work with, as do I. We're very lucky. And I want to thank you again for participating. You were fabulous. Thank
Thank
you.
you, Evelyn.